Lindsay Miller. I was laughing just earlier that your business, your website is called the Stress Nanny, and I find myself a little bit stressed today. So I said to my husband, "This is so appropriate. I get to speak to Lindsay from the Stress Nanny." In any case, the reason I did bring it up not is to deal with my stress from today, but I looked at your website and we had a mutual colleague introduce us, and we have so much in common. One of the
Yeah.
things we both have one girl. Yours is
Yes.
15 and mine's 13. I just learned before we chatted.
Yes.
And we both are extremely passionate about teaching children how to breathe well, right? And we're
Yes.
dove into this industry of how do we help impact the stress, anxiety, and mental health of children,
Yeah.
right? And you do this by mindfulness coaching, which I think is
Mhm.
super fascinating. So before we get sort of dive into our conversation I want us to have today, it's going to be a little bit like you and I are sitting in a coffee shop, is what I'm envisioning. Before that, tell us about you. Tell us, how did you come to create the Stress Nanny, and how did you start mindfulness coaching?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks again for having me. I was delighted about this introduction and the chance to connect. So,
Mm.
thank you for having me on the show. And yeah, I felt so much resonance when I was looking at your work as well. And so I think this is going to be such a fun chat. But I got started actually a long time ago when I was in college. I studied child development, and I kind of wanted to go into teaching. I kind of wanted to go into psychology, and I couldn't really land on a path forward that felt like the right fit. Like I wanted to help kids like in their homes, not in an office, not, like I wanted to support families at home. And I was trying to figure out the best way to do that. And there didn't seem to be a clear avenue. Like I could be a
Mm.
therapist and have an office. I didn't really love the idea of being an expert about anyone else because I think we're all
Mm.
experts on ourselves. And
Right.
so I wanted to be in more of a support role where I was just providing like tools and help. I wanted to work with families. I was really clear on that. I
Mm.
think families have such an impact on society, and like day-to-day life happens in families, right? And so the interactions we have there are so formative. So I had this vision of myself like somehow helping families in their homes. And this is pre-internet, right? And so this is just like me thinking, I don't know how that's going to work out, but that's kind of what see as the best way to do this work. And so, fast forward like 15 years, and I've had navigated infertility. I've gotten my degree. I'm sorting out different aspects of my life. I have some health struggles that I've got to work through. And I've been like, man, the tool that has been there for me at every juncture, along
Mm.
that journey is mindfulness. It's been like that attention to the present, the
Mm.
processing of emotions, and then the intentional choice, right? And so I was like, I've gotta figure out how to share this, because this is the thing I have relied on again and again and again, and it's never failed me, right? Like it's come through every time. And so I started teaching, I got my certification, my international mindfulness teacher certification. I started teaching adult women. And I was like, this is mindfulness. It's amazing, and I had my yoga certification. And so I was just thinking, this is really great. But I kept having that thought, like, I really want to be teaching this to families. I don't know how, I don't know
Mhm.
what that looks like, but it feels like it could have such an impact. So, we get to like the pandemic, right? And there's things just going a little bit AWOL for everybody. And I've been teaching kids here and there just based on clients I'd come in contact with. And all of a sudden, there was just this massive need, right? I mean, it just
Mm.
like kids all over the world who are at home with their families and stressed like never before, right? And the stress on kids during the pandemic was very unique, right? Because developmentally they're at these different stages. They don't have the same level of like coping tools that the rest of us have been, having for the 30 plus years we've been living. And so all of these things combined created this scenario where I was getting people to, reaching out like, "Hey, can you help my kid? Hey, my kid is doing this." And then as we emerged from the pandemic, there was even more kind of backlog of stuff that we realized kids were carrying. And so
Mm.
helping them work through some of the anxiety they had around getting back to school or being around people, developmental stages that they'd had in isolation that they were kind of now trying to
Right.
navigate in, in person along with everything else, it just created this scenario where more and more families were looking for the support. And then one day I kind of stopped and turned around and was like, I think this is it, right? Like, I think this
Mm,
is the thing I had envisioned is me on Zoom talking to kids, talking to kids in their homes, talking them through the things they're navigating, giving them the tools, practicing the tools with them, coming up with fun ways to breathe, and then allowing them to take those tools into their week, figure out, play around with them, figure out how they work, figure out what the information does to support them. Coming back, we check in the next week, what worked, what didn't work. And then we just cultivate this really beautiful mindfulness practice that's more of an everyday, playful, fun practice that is
right,
suitable for kids that then, it carries them through their days and creates this really amazing foundation that they get to build the rest of their lives on, right? Because
right.
how many times, like, did you and I say at some point in our adulthood, "Man, I wish I'd had this earlier."
Yeah, right, right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I also think about okay, so let me tell you where my mind is at. So I have been on this journey for the last while, reading all these different books about attention.
Mhm.
And um, we say all that because I think it's just getting more and more prevalent, right? And so some of the books I've been reading, Lindsay, are Stolen Focus by Johan Hari, which was one of the best books on Amazon. I think last year, 2023. I just finished reading The Attention Merchants by Tim Wu, and I'm currently reading the Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, which he also wrote the Coddling the American Mind, which I also read. But where my mind is at right now, Lindsay, is this the trajectory of where attention, like the root cause of where attention has come from. Because, I've shared with our community, and I haven't mentioned to you yet, but my daughter was diagnosed with, autism, anxiety, depression, ADHD, the whole nine yards. She was a very difficult. We had a difficult time together in her childhood. Me trying to navigate that, and her as well.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I just am always thinking about like why. And I think because now she's 13, I'm at a better place where I'm stepping back and sort of looking at the bigger picture, not, when the kid's little and you're just like so in the weeds.
Mhm.
And now
Yeah.
I'm taking a step back and thinking, Lindsay, like, what is the bigger picture? Exactly what you're talking about is if we had had this when we were younger, but also, what has changed in society as humans. And so now I've been thinking about, I know this has probably happened for the last several years. It's just I'm now becoming more present. I have this space and capacity to think about it. But this idea of mental health crisis for children, we hear about this too, but
Mhm.
specifically around attention. And I've been thinking
Mm.
about, where it's come from. And these books talk about the history, right? So we went from radios to televisions to, then remote controls. So we could, stop and start it. And then we had phones, and then, there was the internet, and then phones, and then now it's like the smartphone is on us. So now we have Apple Watches on us. So it's become part of our human self. And I see that with my daughter too, right? Is that, oh my gosh, she has to have something on. She has to be entertained all the time. And she's an extrovert, so she likes to have people around all the time, right? So it has to be, on her phone or watching television or, everything has to be, it's instant. So this loss of attention is terrifying. And we think about like those of us our age, right? I think about, oh my gosh, I grew up on a farm in the middle of Canada, and I could do what I wanted, and we were outside, we were playing, we had a little pond. I mean, life was just like idyllic, right? And it was a good time in the 70s to be young and carefree. And now I think, oh my gosh, also because of the pandemic, right? The screens went up, the amount of time sedentary, like sitting on couches, increased, I feel like, right? And then not going outside as much as they used to. It's a struggle, right? Whereas my brother and I, it was like boom, we were out. We didn't have to be told to go outside, we were just
Right.
out. So, how do we use this, like mindfulness? It sounds like, oh, take a deep breath, but like how do we what are you seeing with your clients, your little ones there? What are you seeing in terms of this attention issue?
Yeah, this is such great observations and
Mm.
such a great question. So I work with kids online between the ages of 6 and 18, right? And so there's a pretty big spectrum of
Mm,
like attention observations going on, right? Because like the range of attention for those ages is significant. One of the things that we talk about with mindfulness is the way that I describe it to kids is knowing what's going on inside of you, knowing what's going on outside of you, and making a choice on purpose.
mm,
So, being able to tune in at any given moment to like your present state, emotionally, physically, mentally, your relational state, what's around you, how you are existing in the world, what contexts you are in, and then how those things combine, right? So, basically, it's presence, but it's just like a deeper kind of definition of it. And I think that it's one of the reasons mindfulness is a crucial life skill for children, right? Like you're
mm.
describing, and I saw a meme the other day that was so funny. It was like, we didn't need mindfulness growing up because watching the
Yeah.
condensation drip off of the bus window
Yes.
was like all we had
I
to pay
saw
attention
that.
to, you know?
Yes. Right. Yeah. That's right. When we went for car rides, we just sat in the car,
Yeah, that
right?
was
Like,
it.
right, when you waited in line in the grocery with your parents, you just waited in line in the
Yeah.
grocery store, right?
Totally. And
Right.
so it really is different, right? Like you're describing because there's always a way to engage your mind, always a way to get distracted. And so
Yeah.
really taking that intentional time to focus attention on specific things is crucial. And one of the things that I think is unique about my approach, and I'm so grateful for it, is when I was pregnant with my daughter, I was, looking at different ideas for toddlers and kids, and I stumbled across this woman who had a Montessori background and she was setting up her nursery. And
Mm,
so I started looking at the different things she was doing, and I was like, "This is so intriguing to me." Well, the way she was setting it up and the kind of the ideology behind it. So I started to explore it even more, and I fell in love with this Montessori approach, right? And one of the key aspects of a Montessori approach is respect for attention, respect for
mm,
concentration.
right.
And so, like when you're watching a child in any setting and you see them concentrating on something, like you leave it alone, right? Like you just let that concentration happen. And so it's tricky now though, because right, if they're only concentrating on their phone, which can keep them, just engaged for hours on end, it's an interesting sell to kind of help them shift that attention and that
Yeah.
concentration into something maybe a little more productive, maybe a little more supportive, maybe
Mm,
a little bit more, natural, like you're saying, outside types of things. And so one of the things that I think is crucial in teaching kids mindfulness is really teaching them the power of harnessing their attention and being in command of it.
yeah.
Instead of just like
Right.
letting it be at will, just kind of spread out over whatever stimuli comes their way,
Right.
which is more and more often, right, what we're seeing.
So when you say back to that first bit about you talking to your little ones there about like being aware of your inside,
Mhm.
how are you prompting them to do that? Because I think
Mhm.
that in itself, you said it so beautifully and it sounds lovely, but I think in my mind, I think, okay, my kid, how am I going to teach her? You know what I
Totally.
mean?
Yeah.
Like what's beyond what's underneath
Yeah,
that? How do we teach kids to
to
tune
do
in?
that. Yeah. Yeah, great question. So, one of the things that I also took from a Montessori approach, and I substituted in a Montessori school for a while and really just soaked it all up. I loved it. But one of the things that Montessori also taught was that you want the materials that you use to teach to be inviting.
Yeah.
So
Right.
in terms of like creating an atmosphere where kids want to learn something, the more inviting you can make the materials, the
Mm,
more engaged they're going to be, right?
mm,
And so my approach, I send the kids mail every week. And so we do an activity, an art project. The other day I sent them like moss and pine cones and raffia, and we like made a little nature collage. So
Yeah.
some of the things that we do to help kids understand mindfulness, in my opinion, need to be a little more fun, playful, and interactive because it is such an abstract concept, right? Like, please tune into how you're feeling right now.
Right.
I mean, and kids will be
Yeah.
like, "Ah," and especially if you're the
Right.
parent, right? Like, one of the
Yeah.
ways I can get traction with kids is that I'm not the parent. So,
Yes.
like, automatically, I have a different, level of
Yes.
interest. But when we can use so like Lindsay Brayman has this pillow. She has several different varieties of it. She's an artist. Who also has a psychotherapy background, and so she combines her art and psychotherapy in these beautiful ways, but she has these pillows that sometimes I get for my clients, and it's like a sensation emotion pillow. So on the pillow, it's this wheel, and it has sensations on the outside and then feelings on the inside, and so it says if your eyebrows are raised, you might be surprised. If your gut is clenching, you might be nervous, right? So they can either
Mm.
triangulate the, like, sensation or the emotion. They can use both inputs, what's going on inside of you, right? Like, what you're thinking, what your body is
Mm.
doing, to know, like, tune in. So, simple props like that, and again, as someone who practices this with kids on a weekly basis, I have a little bit more buy-in than a parent who's saying, on a daily basis, "Go pick
Yes.
up the pillow and let's figure it out." But what
Yes.
I find is that, at least with the approach that I take, I educate parents every week. I'll email them after the session to give them the tools that we went over, and what they can do is then use those tools at home in a more neutral way. Right, like, it didn't come from them, it came from me, and so they can
Right.
they can be like, "Hey, do you have that pillow Lindsay sent? Like, maybe that could help in this situation," or, like, "Check out the pillow
Mm.
to see if we can get any clues here," or, um I also think, because your daughter's older and I know, we have to, layer any interaction with their developmental trajectory, right? So a little kid who's just learning
Mm.
the words, we're just teaching them the words for what's going on inside of you. Like, "Oh, you
Yeah.
look so sad right now." Or "You seem like you're
Mm.
very frustrated." But, like, as kids get older and then they have the vocabulary, we can start to help them understand, like, what the emotion looks like for them personally,
Mm.
what it means, in terms of their behavior. Like, "Oh, usually when you're feeling shy, you hide behind me. That just means you're feeling kind of shy right now."
Mm.
Like, so then they have the words, right? And then as they get to the adolescent stage, we've already cultivated this shared vocabulary. We have different experiences, and it's just part of the way we converse. And also, again, there are so many fun ways we can introduce, and I have a bunch here. Like, I have yet to find a kid who doesn't like learning about emotions and like how the brain impacts emotion, like which parts of the brain are responsible for emotion. So with older kids, we'll take a more scientific approach and be like, "So you love science, right? So
Mm.
here's a science fact about the brain. Like, here's a little neuroscience for today." And my approach is like largely steeped in interpersonal neurobiology. And so it's like the idea that the what's going on in our brains has a lot to do with our relationships, right?
Mm.
So sometimes it's mostly for me a matter of finding something the kid is excited about and then helping them understand how mindfulness supports that thing. Instead of me saying, "You should know how you feel." It's like when you're on a soccer field and you're feeling really frustrated because your team's behind, but you can catch up. If you lose it and you can't manage your emotions in that moment, you're toast, right? Like, you're not going to be able to have the
Mhm.
impact on the field that you would have if you're balanced. So let's figure out how to help you stay balanced so you can go up there and kick butt and make that goal in order to tie the game or win the game, right? So
Right.
playful, figuring out what's important to them and using that as an avenue.
Right. And I think too, thinking about in terms of attention, I feel like the children are coming with it's just so much more noisy. It's just noisier, right? In their minds and their thoughts. And so I think trying to weed through that in order to come to a more of a blank slate, to be able to move forward, to make decisions, to be able
Mhm.
to tune into themselves. Like, there's a piece before that where, why would I want to tune into myself when, either screen or sugar or these other things that are much more interesting, right, in the moment, or like over scheduling, right? They're
Mhm.
just up to a lot more things than we used to. We didn't have after school, you know, programs and clubs and everything like that growing up either, right? So if they're living in this place or even in the classrooms are way noisier, right? There's a lot of big behaviors now than there ever was before. And so for teachers, oh my gosh, like I remember, last year coming home as a teacher substitute, some days I literally had to come home, lay down, Lindsay, with like a eye pillow and then just like reduce sensory, like do a sensory withdrawal, right? Like it's just so much. So I
Yeah.
guess I'm thinking about like, what you're talking about is so dreamy, like I wish I could be a fly on the wall with some of your coaching, your mindfulness coaching. And then I'm thinking on the other side of it, I can't help but have that like, yeah, it doesn't sound real. Like, you know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like as a teacher, as a
totally.
parent,
Mhm.
how in the world am I even going to have my child or my students come to, like you said, you got buy-in because you're with these children
Yeah.
once a week, but how do you get buy-in on a like a daily basis, a regular
Basic.
basis for children to say, to take that pause, to choose, mindful practices over all these other stimulating activities. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and this is where I think our work dovetails so beautifully. Because one of the things that I am really big on is using like mindfulness stories in order to help families just make it part of a conversation. So, for example, in our house, one mindfulness story that's been helpful from the time my daughter was little, I'll give you like the iterations of this one is like the thought river. So it's not a full beautiful story like you tell, which I love, right? But it's just a small little snippet of mindfulness that we can weave into conversations throughout the day. So the thought river, I'm sure you're familiar with it. The idea being like we all have a river of thoughts going through our head all day long. We get input in that river from a variety of places, right? Like, and you alluded to some of those. We get them from our phone, from school, from parents, like from friends. The thoughts that come down our river are very, very diverse and come from a variety of places. And a lot of times what we're doing is we're in the river just kind of like drowning in the thoughts, right? Like we're like
Yes.
trying to come up for air, we're getting
Yes.
whacked around and splashed and we like
Yes.
cannot even see anything. And one thing we've said in our house is like what we have to remember is we can always step out of the river. And there's like a nice little rock there on the side of the river that we can go sit on that we can watch our thoughts go by. Like we can watch the thoughts that come down the river. We can choose the ones we want to pay attention to and let the rest go.
Oh my gosh, I love this. Is that yours? Like the thought river, is that yours or did you borrow it from your?
Oh, it's, teaching from an art teacher my sister had back in I mean, but I've, like, iterated it to
Okay.
make it my own. But, yeah, he taught
I
it
love it.
as a mindfulness yeah.
I love that because we talk a lot about here is this idea. I still have this water analogy.
Mhm.
So I'm thinking, I personally think of, I was in Panama going down the river. Like I think of a Central American situation
Yeah.
where you're either drowning underwater as a teacher or parent, right? You're drowning, and there's just too much going on, or else you have your head above water and you're getting the supports and you kind of feel like you're treading water, right? Or you're in the boat and you've got your support crew and you're cruising down, the sun is out, and the flowers, the birds, that sort of thing. And then
Yeah.
also we talk about like going down little, side
Mhm.
bodies of water, and you might want to take a break. So I love this idea how that also could work as the thought river in terms of our thought, because I always talk to my daughter about the clouds in the sky
Mhm.
passing, but
Mhm.
I like the idea of what you said, bringing that all together, it's still water, of going and sitting on the side. I love that, coming and sitting on the side on a rock, and you don't have to have all those thoughts. And if she has, like, she's come home, she's just started, the school year, and she's got
Mhm.
all these ideas. She wants,
Mhm.
her friends are doing really well in the
Yeah.
classes. And so she wants to do well, right? And
Yeah.
that's going to be hard for her to keep sustained attention to these goals. But I could talk to her today about, that thought river of, here's your goal, here's where you want to go down the river.
Mhm.
And you might have to take a step, take a side bar, right? And sit and think about, oh my gosh, I have all these other distractions in my life, but what is going to get me closer to where I want to go? What
Mm.
thoughts can I let go on by, or what activities can I let go on by so that
Yeah.
I can reach the goals that I want to reach,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah,
love that.
exactly. Yeah, and I can show you even last night, one of the groups that I teach is a mindfulness club. So kids, it's a group coaching. So we made like thought rivers, right?
Oh,
Like so it's out of fabric. And then
oh,
we put our thoughts on there, like of what we could think, like possible thoughts. And then like, here's our comfy rock over here. And like which ones we're gonna take with us, right? To put
oh,
like which
Lindsay.
ones we want to pull out of the river.
Yeah.
In the original story, the teacher had said, like, "We often pull the dead pig out of the river and take it with us." Like,
Oh,
you don't have to pull out the dead pig. Like, we take the awful, shocking, the thoughts that are beating ourselves up. Those are generally the thoughts a lot of us are, like, grabbing out of the river and, like, sticking in our
yes.
backpack, right? But we can choose. That's the whole point. And so, just a simple story like that, like, if you can refer to your daughter and get her buy-in, and for the kids I work with, a lot of times crafts help it sink in, so they have like a visual of it, right? It's not just this idea. And then they've put their thoughts on the river. So last night, to your point, some of the kiddos were putting on like, so like, these are all the goals I have. These are all the things I want to do. And I was like, okay, and how do we feel if we are like trying to focus on all of those things all at once? And she's like completely overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so
That was me
then,
today. That
yeah,
was absolutely me today. My stress came
yeah,
because I just had too many things all at
yeah, too
once.
many things.
Right.
And so
It's
we're
not
like,
life threatening. We
they're
do it
going to
to
be
ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, they're gonna be in the river still, like, they'll circle back around, so,
Yes.
"Which 2 do you wanna pull this week?" And she decided which 2, she was, like,
I love that.
focusing on some projects and then something she was excited to learn about. She was like, "Those are the 2." And I was like,
Oh my
"Okay,
goodness.
great. How do you feel having those 2?" And she was like, "Good." You know?
Well, you might have to see if there's a story, like a children's book written. Otherwise, we should write one because that's
Okay,
amazing. I
let's do
love
it.
it. That's so great.
Yeah,
That's yeah, so that's amazing. So that is one way that you're helping children be in charge of their attention, because so
yeah,
often you hear, right? The thing in classroom is, pay attention,
yeah.
or to as parents, pay attention, or can't you listen to me, or can't you hear me, but
Mhm.
it doesn't what we're missing is how. And
Yeah.
again, it's not something we had to teach. It's, same with
Mhm,
breathing or mindfulness.
mhm,
Like you said in the beginning, we didn't have to teach that because it came a lot more naturally, right? So,
mhm.
how do we teach attention through mindfulness? And that's one great way is the thought river. Do you have any other neat
Yeah.
ideas or
Yeah, so I
thoughts?
I love myself some nature. I know you love nature too. So
Yeah.
I one of the ways when I'm first talking to kids about it, again, we talk a lot about neuroscience, and we kind of meet at the intersection of neuroscience and mindfulness. And so we'll talk about the amygdala, which is
Yeah.
back here, right? And then the prefrontal cortex, which is up here. And we talk about how a lot of times our nervous system is in a constant state of fight or flight because our amygdala doesn't know the difference between a lion chasing us and a spelling test. So our amygdala is constantly telling us we are threatened, and we need a way to filter that information because it doesn't help us to feel constantly threatened.
Mhm.
Right. And kids connect with this, especially I work with a lot of kids who tend toward anxiety. And so they're just having that constant weight of it, right? So they're invested in figuring out any way to make that burden a little lighter. And so we talk about how in any given moment, like those connections within our brain, they're real, right? They're physical things, but they're connections that can be stronger. So we'll talk about it like a trail, like a hiking trail nearby your house. So I have quite a few trails in this canyon by my house. Some of them are very narrow where only one person can go by at a time. Some of them are a lot wider, and there's like a shoreline trail where you can walk with 6 of your best friends. So in our brains, we want the equivalent of that wide trail in terms of those neural connections, right? We want a wide trail between the amygdala that's telling us to be afraid all the time and the prefrontal cortex that can say, this is actually a spelling test that we already studied for. And even if it doesn't go great, it's going to be fine.
Mm.
That's the kind of connection we wanna have strong, right? But in order to do that, we have to draw attention to the moments when the amygdala is the boss. So Dan Siegel has this great concept of like upstairs brain and downstairs brain, and how the downstairs brain is just our more basic, like breathing, fight, flight, freeze, faint, fawn, response, blinking, those, that's the downstairs brain job. And the upstairs brain is like creativity, imagining, problem solving. So when I talk to kids, we're like, well, which part of your brain do you want to use most of the time? And, obviously they want to use the upstairs brain. And so in order to do that, we have to have attention because the amygdala is getting constantly activated by like the girl in the hall who looked at you the wrong way, the spelling test you got back that didn't go the way you wanted to, the homework that you have tonight that you're feeling really nervous and overwhelmed about because you don't know how you're going to get it done after soccer practice, right? Like there's just a constant, like you're saying, flow of information, which is triggering the amygdala. So when we can draw attention to the amygdala, we notice like, oh, I actually could use my upstairs brain, my prefrontal cortex in this moment to help me widen that connection so that I can, instead of just getting a tiny little single trail of like, be afraid, everything's awful, you're like horrible, all of the amygdala's fear coming at us 24/7, we have that wider trail where the prefrontal cortex sends back a message that's like, steady, steady, we're going to be okay. Everything's going to be fine. You have your parents who can help you tonight with that paper. You just need to talk to your friend about why she's upset. There are going to be other opportunities for you to get some extra credit to make up that math score, right? Like that's the part of our brain that can help. So, and again, like kids are invested in learning that and understanding it and bringing attention to it when they realize how it serves them. So, like, if they don't have to be worried about all those things all the time and feel like they're running around life like this, they're usually pretty interested, like, oh, I don't have to feel that way. I don't have to be worried about everything. And no, you don't. But it does take a little bit of
Right.
practice and some mindfulness, some attention in order to create the kind of feelings that you want to have as you move through life.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and we talk about the bulldog brain and the wise owl brain as well. But I'm thinking that what you're describing is also sort of executive coaching,
Mhm.
right? And
Yeah.
so helping children with these executive functioning skills.
Mhm.
And, how can they possibly, of course they can't, do an assignment in order or get their homework done on time or organize their backpacks or remember to, make their beds or
Yeah.
remember to bring their lunch bag out. I mean, of course they can't when they're stuck in this, reptilian brain of theirs in the fight or
Mhm.
flight. So if they're coming
Mhm.
in, after school, for example, they're coming in hot, from the bus,
Yep.
and, I can imagine my daughter, right? There's stuff going on at school or so and so said something and
Yeah.
she's been holding it in all day long. And so it's like a whoosh
Yeah.
explosion when
Yeah.
she gets home, right? And so you can't then say instantly, "Oh, hey, get ready, can you get are you ready for
Yeah.
math tutoring? Are you ready for whatever?" Like
Mhm.
there needs to be a pause. There needs to be a moment with, as you're saying, mindfulness, right? A pause between, how do you get from that reptilian brain, the bulldog brain, up to the wise owl, right?
Yeah.
And this is the mindfulness offers us that opportunity, that pause for both
Mhm.
them, for both adults and children.
Mhm.
Like imagine if us as parents, oof, imagine if I could go back in time, you know?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, my meditation practice, on a side note, definitely saved my parenting career for sure. I mean, definitely, but, sometimes you gotta
Yeah.
go deep and dark before you really come out from that, but nonetheless. Anyway,
Yeah.
back to the kiddo, like, that's a great way to think about executive functioning skills and mindfulness as well, is how do you pay attention by having this pause of mindfulness, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, totally. And I love to the realization that most parents have of just how and every kid is different, right? So like as we're talking about, ADHD and anxiety and a lot of things that kind of create different like neurodivergent scenarios. Like it's going to vary kid to kid, right?
Right.
But there's so much potential there if we create that space, like you're saying,
Mm,
right? Like, so wow, that sounds like a lot. What a day you had. Like what is your
mhm,
plan for the afternoon? But like again, just like the pause, the recognition, the holding space for all the things that were just shared, right? And then the invitation to, like, tune in. So it doesn't even have to be explicit, right? Like, that sounds like your amygdala was, and I know you're not saying that, but, like,
yes, right.
we can use our own executive function to notice what's going on, to read the room, see where our kid is at, and then that power to just, co-regulate is so strong, right? Like, if you can bring I love that graphic where it's, like, the waves of it's like a water scene, and there are a bunch of waves, and then you're like a little bit more calm water, and how if those big waves meet the calm water, it evens things out, and co-regulation is so much like that. Like if we can steady ourselves enough that those moments can come to us and we can sit in them and then reflect back what we're seeing, we invite those mindful
Mm,
moments, whether it's very clearly and directly and we're saying the word mindfulness, or we're just holding ourselves in a mindful way.
right, right. And I think this makes me think about, like we talked initially about, the attention crisis being resulted in children's mental health
Mhm.
crisis. But I also really believe that we have a grown up, an adult mental health crisis. So I'm thinking back to when you mentioned, you don't have to go into specifics, but you said along your journey you had a lot of health problems, a lot of
Mhm.
infertility, all these things were going on. When you talked about that mindfulness was the thing that was the thread, can you tell us, what a story that feels comfortable for you, but
Yeah.
a moment when, you almost hit rock bottom, or because there's many people in our community that are really the words drowning, or,
Mhm.
exhausted,
Yeah.
overwhelmed. This is not
Yeah.
just like I'm overwhelmed for 5 minutes. This is like
Right.
a
No.
whole
Deep.
state of being,
Yes. Yeah.
and um it's something that is not, they don't wake up the next day and figure it out, like
Mhm.
a friend of mine texted the day she was day day 2 of 1st grade, and she said, "I'm already frustrated, I wanna quit." They're down like 9 teachers assistants, and they're billing, like,
Yeah.
there's a lot going on. So
Yeah.
how do we help? What can we what practical advice can we offer grown-ups in these moments where things just feel too much? And our
Yeah.
humans, let's be frank, right? It there's a lot. No human should take on what we have going on right now. And I
Yeah.
just keep thinking, how do we get out of this? Where do we go from here? So,
Yeah. Yeah. That's such a great question. And one of the things I like to point out to like the families that I work with and to anyone in general is one of the things that is so challenging about living right now is like these skills that we're talking about, they really are essential life skills.
mm,
I think you and I can also agree these are not skills that we taught, practiced. We didn't learn these skills growing up. And so parents, teachers, everybody on the fly is trying to pick up the skills as they go and teach them
mm,
to their kids and manage all the things, right? It feels impossible. So
mm,
like I have so much compassion and so little judgment, right? Like no, that's mindfulness. We're just compassionate awareness every week on my calls. I'm like, we're just noticing this gently, and I feel like that's such a key thing we can offer ourselves is that aspect of mindfulness, just the compassionate awareness and the understanding that we can grace ourselves with simply by in the noticing. And a lot of times what we do is we notice and then berate. Right? Like we
mm,
notice something that we're doing and beat ourselves up for it. We notice it and then think about how it's wrecking our kid. We notice it and then we think about how it's like the biggest mistake we made all week.
mm,
And the more we can cultivate that gentleness with ourselves, it doesn't make those moments necessarily easier, but it makes the aftermath of those moments a ton easier, right?
mm,
Because we don't suffer twice. Like we suffer the first time, but we don't have to suffer again if we choose gentleness. So
mm,
that would be like a first encouragement I would offer is just, and that's one of the things we learn in meditation practice, right? If we are sitting on a cushion and breathing, we redirect our attention to the breath continually, right? And a lot of people, when I when I teach meditation, I taught meditation teachers for a while. So they were like learning to become meditation teachers. And without fail, every one of them was like, I'm just stink at this. I'm so awful at meditating. And we're like,
Right.
that is, you're like, that is actually the whole point. None of us are great at it. No one is good at this. And
Right.
the continued effort is the reason we do it, right? It's that
Mm.
gentle redirect of attention. That's where we learn how to gently just move on to the next moment, right? And so anyway, if you're looking for a more specific way to practice that, just a 2-minute meditation practice where you sit by your bed and take some deep breaths, notice when your breath, your attention is not on your breath, gently bring your awareness back. Over time, you learn to be more gentle. Another thing that I would say in terms of just the gentleness is like the recognition that you have community and like a
Mm.
village, and I think so many of us have come out of like the pandemic with a limited, I don't know if it's ability, but a limited range in terms of like the networks that we're comfortable in, because it feels like the stress levels everywhere are heightened. So maybe
Mm.
some of the places where we used to get some relief or some support are no longer available. Maybe they don't feel the same as they used to. And so giving yourself permission to like really tune in and access the community that feels supportive to you, I
Mhm.
think is crucial. Because there are so many, especially in like the community you're describing, as parents, teachers, as we're looking to support this growing generation of children, and we're seeing a lot, that awareness that we have going down our thought river is massive. And we're
Mm.
nervous for ourselves, we're nervous for the kids, we're nervous for what it's going to look like 20 years from now, we're nervous for our parents who were taking care, right? I mean, we're just like, we're concerned, and the love and empathy that we have is like flowing everywhere. And so if
Yeah.
we can just take a minute and again be gentle with ourselves, acknowledge that what we are carrying right now is a lot, and then give ourselves permission to access the support that we need. And there's free support available in, different areas. It doesn't necessarily have to be paid support. Um, and then one other tool that I teach this to my kiddos who are super empathetic, and it's one we learned in our house very, very young. But like our empathy flashlight, we turn it off sometimes.
Mm.
So we all have the ability to have empathy. Some of us carry a lot more empathy than others. Those of us who tend toward a ton of empathy, and again, these populations that we're talking through today are among those folks. We tend to have that empathy flashlight on all the time.
Mm.
Everywhere we go, that empathy is kind of just flowing out of us, which is so beautiful. And it's such a powerful gift to humanity. And also, like just
Mm.
like a flashlight, it burns us out if we don't kind of like turn it
Mm.
off sometimes. And so learning to not be, it's not that we're turning it off and being harsh and awful to people. It's just that
Mm.
we're not taking in quite as much, right? And we're
Right.
focusing on ourselves and like our self-care and what we need. Um, and so that's something I would offer too.
Yeah. Listening to you there, I'm thinking that we don't, speaking of the attention, right? We are the grown-ups also today. We still have, phones on our watches, or
Yeah.
our phones or the internet or social media and everything else too. We also have it as much as children do, right?
Mhm.
But when you're talking there about we have, that's where we're getting this need to be perfect. This need because we're such caregivers, right? We have so much to give and we want to be the best teacher, the best parent because we see on Pinterest or Instagram or we
Right.
see from others or talking to others, and then we see this horrific, you turn the news on. I mean, I turned the news on. I haven't been watching it for about a year. I decided I needed a break. I turned
Yeah.
it on and there horrifically is a school shooting. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like, how is this still a
Yeah.
thing, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yep.
so
Yep.
heartbreaking, but it sits with you. And
Mhm.
it's almost like you're talking about empathy flashlight, but it's also the attention flashlight too of like,
Yeah.
what am I going to choose? Or a channel, maybe your attention channel
Yeah.
of, which channel am I going to be looking at in life? Do I, if
Mhm.
am I going to choose social media right now? Or am I going to choose a book to read? Am I going to choose something that's going to lift me up? Am I going to choose to be around people who lift me up? it's almost like, yeah, thinking of that thought river, but like the attention river, right? Of I'm
Yeah.
going to choose who's in my boat. I'm going to choose what I'm paying attention to so I can
Mhm.
build myself back up again,
Yeah.
right? Because if I'm
Yeah.
drowning, I'm not helping anybody. And
Right.
so sometimes we have to take a break back. And I went through this last year, what, there's sometimes you have to say, you know what, time out. Like, I
Yeah.
need to go sit on that river for maybe a year or two, right? On
Yeah.
the side and just
Yeah.
look after myself first. The
Yeah.
old,
100%.
right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
can't
Well, and
do it all the time.
yeah, and I realized I didn't answer that part of your question, but I have definitely had seasons, multiple seasons, right? Some of them
Mm,
lasted months. Like my first foray into like managing infertility, I was like, everything is fine. Everything is fine. It's all, you know what I mean? And I, for a long
yeah.
time, I tried to tell myself everything was fine. And I was like, if I just tell myself and think positive, it will all go away, or it'll all be
Right.
okay. And
Yeah.
over time, it didn't, right? And so I think as much as I'm an optimist and as much as I want to think about, moving through something really beautifully, there are so many, seasons of my life, where I needed to pause, and at that juncture I went, and saw a therapist, and I had been working on figuring some stuff out on my own and reading a lot of books. And really, I was in my early 20s and I was like, actually, I need some professional help. And we were actually sitting
Mm,
in a uh, the IVF doctor that we were working with. We are sitting in his office and we started talking about kind of the final things we would need to do in order to get our cycle started. And I just started crying, partly from
mm,
relief, partly from fear, right? Like I just was feeling
mm.
overwhelmed. And he said to me, Mrs. Miller, I'm gonna take your emotional battery up. You need it full going into this, right? Like
Yeah.
you're
Right.
at zero right now. Like you bless your heart, right? But you're needing to kind of shore yourself up in order to engage with this process. And at first I was
Mm,
like, I was like adding insult to injury, right? Like, what do
right.
you mean? I've been trying this whole time to stay positive and to stay,
Yes.
upbeat and optimistic. And he was like, you are doing a great job. And also, you're going to need support through this. So
Mm,
he gave me the name of a woman. Anyway, that was me landing in the psychotherapist's office for the first time, thinking to myself something was going on and I was broken and like in all the ways, right? And she was like, it sounds like you're human. And I was like, oh, this
mm.
is normal for humans? Like we have to feel our feelings? Like what? Really? I
Right.
thought we could just kind of gloss over, because that hadn't been something that I focused on a lot or had been
Right.
taught a lot. I was mostly taught to kind of put those things aside and do what you had to do. And so
Yeah.
anyway, I think so I've had so many moments like that where it was like maybe at the prodding of someone else, maybe an extremely humble moment where I hit rock bottom about like my health or and needing another, support system in place or recognizing this is going to take some time. So
Mm,
as I met with her over the course of months, we worked through different things. And sure enough, I came through with like a level of resilience, respect, and confidence around what I was navigating that I never would have gotten
mm.
without that pause, right?
Yeah, I love it. And now this thing, something I come back to all the time. Judith Hanson Lassiter wrote the book, The Nonviolent Communication, right? She always says,
Yes.
How Human of Me. And
Yes.
I tell you what, that's been a savior. I mention it all the time, right? Is for some, there's something, and there's actually something physiological by putting one hand on your
Mhm.
chest. There's something
Mhm.
that happens to your body also.
Yeah.
But when I do that, I just feel like my shoulders come down and I just take a deep breath. That's the pause, right? Just how human of me in the face of, my daughter having a big reaction, or if you're in a classroom and things don't go so well, or there's, sometimes you just got to give yourself some grace. And as you say, that we're human. And, and I think to that point about, I think that some of us need to ask for help, right? Whether it's professional help or medication or other folks to be with or find a group or whatever that is for you, that I think it's okay. Some of us, as you say, we want to muscle through, so to speak, right? And use the mindfulness practice and do all the things, but that sometimes isn't enough,
Mhm.
right? And I discovered that for myself. Like there's, you have to look at the holistic picture. You
Mhm.
can exercise, you can do all the things. I mean, how many
Yep.
health coaches are out there say, do all the things, do
Right.
the health and eat well and get your sleep and breathe well and do yoga,
Mm.
all these things you think. And sometimes that's not enough. And
Yeah.
sometimes, which of those pieces needs to give. So sort of, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, we covered so much today, Lindsay. What would you say sort of your parting words of like, how do we use mindfulness to really impact this attention crisis that we are in right now?
Yeah. I would say it is like just in those pauses, right?
Mm,
Like just taking a minute. And again, it's not a easy thing to do because we have our reactions, right? And we have like the way we've responded to something, our triggers, and it takes time to sort through all of those. And it feels like when you have a tiny person in front of you, you don't have time for any of that, right? And you
right.
just need to either like get somebody in the car and get to school, you need to teach a lesson, right? Like you need to just get through the material because you have this test coming up. You're under pressure that's not your own. And so in those moments it feels like counterproductive to stop, right? Because it feels like you're like what you're saying, the flow of life
Mm,
is fast, and if I don't keep up with it, I'm gonna fall even further behind. But, like, without fail, every time we pause, like, the skill with which we move forward makes up for any lack of speed. So take the pause. This morning, one of my clients, I just started a meeting with her yesterday. Her mom emailed me this morning and she was like, "Actually, I cannot believe this." She was like, "She came off of your call, started talking to her brother about about how the brain works." And she said, I was like listening to her and I was excited that she had been listening. And she said, "But then what happened was this morning, after I had read your email, I knew what you had talked about. I knew what she was thinking. We were having a moment where she was not wanting to wear her uniform to school and was really frustrated. And I just got started to explain why she had to wear it. And then I stopped." And she was like, I remembered what you guys talked about yesterday. And I said, "Hey, do you think it's your upstairs brain or your downstairs brain working right now?" And she's like, "It flipped a switch." Like just
mm,
that small pause with a question, right? And
mm.
she was like, "It changed the whole trajectory of our morning." And it's amazing, right? Like again, just the small pause. So take the pause, let your wisdom fill it with like the next skillful action, and then see what happens.
Ugh, you are a dreamboat, Lindsay. How do we find you online? How does our community find you and connect with you and learn more about your amazing goodness here?
Oh, you're so sweet. I am on Instagram at the Stress Nanny. I have a podcast which we are gonna have a conversation about with your work. So
Oh, great.
let's we're gonna schedule that. But a podcast called The Stress Nanny, and then my website is The Stress Nanny. So
Beautiful.
happy to reach out anytime. I have free resources. A lot of these mindfulness stories I mentioned today I have a podcast specifically with those in it. So if anybody is interested in kind of just trying to work that into their conversations, there's some easy ways to do that.
Awesome. I am so glad we met, and I so look forward to getting to know you and your work more in the future. Thank you so much for taking the time, Lindsay, and for sharing so generously. I have no doubt this is really, people are going to take some really big gems from this conversation. Thank you so much, my dear.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.